welcome to the Storyworks Roundtable. Today we are asking the question, do we put ourselves into our characters? Is every character just a reflection of us, the author? So, here with Matt and Kathryn, do you guys want to start us off? Thoughts about ourselves, our characters?
Well, I mean, the classic piece of advice is like there's a little bit of the author in every character, right? So yes and no.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes and no.
All right, let's wrap it up right there. That's it. There's nothing left to say. Yes and no.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely characters that are a lot of me, but what I realize is if I write myself, it's a really boring story. You know?
Uh-huh.
I don't live an action adventure life, so I don't want to put myself in my stories, and yet, you know, there's a little bit of me in all of the characters, maybe. Sense of humor here, fear of spiders there, right?
Right. Definitely, especially the fear of spiders. Anything with more than 6 legs, get it away from me. Yeah. Yes, you had to squish a centipede last night. It was pretty frightening.
Centipedes are the worst.
Aren't they? I know.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, we all put ourselves into our characters. Do you intentionally draw on parts of yourself? Do you think like, ooh, I know what it's like to be afraid of spiders, so if I give this to the character, it'll be authentic?
Well, and easy. It's less work, right? To do that. If I'm like, oh, I have to research this fear that I don't really understand, like agoraphobia, you know, like that's not something I can personally relate to. So it's probably unlikely that one of my characters is going to have that unless I intentionally put it in. But like my bits of my personality make their way in because it's like within easy reach. Maybe it's within arm's reach.
So it's lazy.
I would agree with that.
Well, I mean, part of it, yeah. But also, like, I don't want to, like, write about something that I know nothing about, you know? So it's either, like, a bunch of research ahead of time or I'm writing about what I know. You know, like, I've always wanted, I haven't found a way to do it yet, but I love rock climbing. I've always wanted to put rock climbers in a story. I just haven't figured out how to do it yet in a way that would fit. But I know a lot about rock climbing, and that would be really easy for me to talk like I know the sport, you know, like I understand the problems and the dangers, risks that are associated with it. I understand the fear of heights, the fear of letting go of the rope, you know, all of that would be so much fun to work into a story. And it's, I don't know if it's, maybe it is laziness on a certain level, but I also like, I know it so well that I'm really excited about writing about it too.
So in our last conversation, we were talking about writing what you don't know and being courageous enough to do that, to use your imagination and empathy and research to go to those places. But it sounded like you were just saying it's better to write what you know than to do the research.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a place for both, right?
I don't think it's so much better as that we do it. Like, we just naturally do it. Like, you'll be writing something and you'll just go to the familiar places and the comfortable things. So if you want to stretch yourself as an author, as a writer, as a human being, you have to do that research. You have to have those experiences that aren't normal to your lifestyle that you're in right then and there. So I think as an author, you're going to naturally start incorporating your own personality and stuff, unless, because it's like a personality bias. You're like, I think I'm funny. Here's my humor, you know, or you have a certain amount of, you know, sassy attitude or sarcasm that you work into your normal everyday dialogue patterns. So things like that will show up. Unless you're consciously working against them. And if you don't have that in there, then your characters are going to start reflecting the things that you hear, say, do every single day. So I think it's, again, that stretching, growing thing is like, you have to push yourself outside of that boundary. Otherwise, you do start getting really autobiographical.
Right. Well, and aren't there certain places where it's good to use your personality and other places where it just doesn't make sense? Like if I give my villain my sense of humor, maybe that doesn't really fit for that character, you know?
Well, or it could be more interesting. You know, in the draft of the character book, which you both have read, I said, your reader will expect your hard-boiled detective to have a drinking problem and your 12-year-old girl to gossip about her friend's latest crush. And if you reverse those problems and give the hard-boiled detective, the gossiping streak, and the 12-year-old girl, the drinking problem. Either you have a problem or you have a really fresh take on that type of a character. So
Right.
I don't know if I would ever say something doesn't belong. It might just be a fresh twist or a nice juxtaposition to some other part of that character, which could be...
Well, and it could make it easier for you to relate to them, too. If you're writing a bit of yourself into your antagonist, then you're more apt to give them more compassion and empathy on the page, which can create for some really interesting situations. So.
Yeah. But I know, Kathryn, you're just digging deep into the dark side, aren't you?
Oh, man. The angst is real.
So I'm reading Snow Crash right now by Neil Stephenson. It's a sci-fi book, and he does a lot of research. Like, you could tell he's researched like computer viruses for Snow Crash, way in depth, right? So, he has the research part, but then he has like his characters tooling around on skateboards. So, like, I don't know Neil Stephenson, but maybe he put a bit of himself into those characters, but like the research kind of augmented it. It's not like it replaces the personality of the character, and there's probably a bit of him in all of his characters, but the research is like a separate thing. It kind of they have to meld together.
Right. Well, and I think no matter how much of ourselves ends up in the character, because we're writing stories that we haven't lived, it's fiction, it's not memoir, we end up having to do research no matter what. Jess and Skog Hall started with myself. I decided it would just be fun. I'm not doing any research. I'm going to make her a vegetarian. I'm going to give her a golden retriever. Nice. I'm going to put her in this town I visited a whole bunch of times, But you start developing your plot, and she needs different traits, different skills, different personality quirks, different relationships. She is not me by any stretch, but we do have more in common than I have with any other character. Because I consciously decided just to have fun with, giving her some of those traits.
Yeah.
And that was an easy place to start, right? It was, it was, not to say that it was like a low bar. It was just like easy to kickstart that, because you're like, oh, I know me. I can write me, and then she can evolve from there. So it's like a great foundation of a real person. So you're starting with a 3D model instead of starting with a flat character who may be like, oh, I'm just going to put in a character who wants revenge. Like, you're starting with nothing there, right? You're starting with a flat wall. But if you start with yourself, at least you have some nuance in there, and then you can build from it.
Right, and I don't recommend that to people as a process. There are stories where it would work and stories where it wouldn't. And this was one where I knew I was writing contemporary fiction, a woman just a little bit younger than myself, a woman, who had several experiences I had had. And I thought, great, that's easy.
But you made a really important distinction in saying that, is that by the time that you were done giving her own personality, her own situation, that she wasn't you. So you may have started with a base that resembled you as a person, but your character isn't you at the end. Like, they are a completely different and separate person.
Right. Yeah, she's totally different.
So I said earlier how you can just put yourself in a story and it just gets really boring. So maybe if you had done that, right, and you didn't continue to evolve the character, and it would have just been you, it would have come across flat, right? Because it's not a fully developed story. She's not integrated into the story. Right?
That's true. Yeah, and I think it also would have been really difficult to write and boring, because starting with me and evolving her, there's this layer of verisimilitude. So people who know me, my close friends, can kind of laugh at the similarities, but to anyone else, they have no clue. But if I were trying to write myself into a story, I would think, how would I do that? Well, what do I look like at, whatever? How would I? And that would have stymied the creative flow, trying to be true to this person instead of this character. And it's really not about me as a person. It's totally about the character and her story.
Right. So were you saying that you couldn't put yourself into a 12th century novel in Spain? Like, you wouldn't be able to lift that up and put you there? I mean, like, kind of a joke, but also like,
yeah.
But you could like start with that, right, and then evolve it, like, for the time and the place and the how she dressed, to fit the era.
I could start with a character, maybe. I don't know. Like Jess was easy because it's contemporary and it's regional.
Right.
And so, Scott Hall is a fictional version of a real town. So it was just fun for me to do that. But I don't know, because of culture and attitudes and belief systems, if I could actually start with me as a template for somebody in a historical piece.
Depends on what you're listing.
Yeah, and in my historical fiction, I still have traits in common with my protagonists, attitudes and desires. But our belief systems are different because they grew up in a much more religiously based era and community than I did. So the belief systems that they were exposed to and that were available to them were so different. The religion, the politics, the nationality, the availability of media and travel. So I don't think I could just plunk myself into a historical story.
Right.
No.
I guess it depends how autobiographical you write. Some authors just write about their life in literary form, and other people like to write about something totally alien to them, totally different, right? A situation they would never find themselves in.
Yeah. Do either of you write autobiographical fiction?
When I have it, it's never good.
Right.
It's not good.
Yeah.
One of the pieces of writing advice that I came across early on when I was trying to write short stories and like putting myself in them was like, you are not an interesting, like you may be an interesting person, but you're not an interesting character, right? You're not a character in a book. Characters in books have like bigger problems, especially depending on the genre, right? Like they're
Yes.
maybe you could put yourself into a contemporary romance or a contemporary mystery, but you're never going to put yourself on a spaceship. You're never going to put yourself in 12th century Spain. Not like lift and drop, right? Like obviously you can put parts of yourself in there, but never the whole.
Right.
Yes, if the fate of the world rests with you, it's over.
And I think we struggle to see our own flaws and how we're growing too. So it'd be hard to write yourself as an interesting character with that growth. And, like that's why writing memoir and stuff can be really hard, because you have to be able to integrate that full arc with yourself in there, and you have to acknowledge your flaws and your failings and the parts that were really hard.
Is that why people write memoirs at the end of their life after they've been through the whole arc and they're like, oh, I see it now. I actually have a clear line of sight on this, because hindsight is perfect. But
you have to have distance from that in order to be able to write about it honestly. And if you're not writing about yourself honestly, then you are going to be a terrible character. So
I'm really glad you said that, Kathryn. That's so relevant, because you do, as a writer, have distance from your character, and so you can see the scope of the character arc from beginning to end of the story and the backstory, and see all of the relevance and the themes, and you craft those things consciously. And when we look at our own lives, we aren't putting all of those puzzle pieces together, and we don't have the same perspective, and we might have emotional sticky points about stuff in our past or other people that are hard to realize and deal with. And so, that's a great point. The perspective piece is huge.
I like how you said that, emotional sticky points.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to put it. Hang-ups, maybe. I respected writers who said, I'm not ready to write this yet. Because like I haven't this, or maybe you don't really know what it's like. You don't have the distance to really see that, like I don't know if I would, I've never had kids. I don't know if I would be able to really like represent fatherhood, because I've never been through it, I think I could do a passable job if I worked at it, but does that mean it's going to come naturally, or that it's going to be something I'm pulling from me? No, it'd be something I would have to like ask people about and take from the experiences of the fathers that I know,
Go do your research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not something you could pull from me.
Right. That's a really great point, which again harkens back to our other conversations about writing what you know versus using empathy and imagination and research. And I know the topics I've written about and the themes and the life experiences have certainly developed as I've matured and gone through more life stages. And I think that's very common with writers, is that the older you get, the more material and the more phases of life you can write about, and the more sort of knowledge you can bring to enrich those characters. Which doesn't mean you couldn't write, you know, a great father story. It just means that it has to come from a different place besides personal experience.
The process is different. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having the well of experience to draw from is pretty powerful. I mean, there is that piece of it's easy because I can access it without going to other sources, but it's also enriching, you know?
Yeah, that's probably why novice writers gravitate towards writing about stories that have happened in their own life, right? Because it's within reach at that point. Something that's more difficult is harder to get through, and so they start with that, and then they develop from there.
Yeah, very true. All right. Any other thoughts about our characters, ourselves?
I'm never going to admit which ones are me.
Oh,
that's it. There you go. Yeah.
Damn, I confessed. My confessional is out there.
I guess just don't be scared to write things that have you in them, because a lot of people get that advice. Oh, don't write yourself as the character. It's like, no, like be confident in the characters you're creating, even if you're pulling from yourself.
Yeah, I would say pull from yourself, but don't try to put yourself fully formed as you are into a story. You know,
and even if you do, like you did with Skog Hall, like you put yourself in there and then it becomes something else. So like at a certain point when the character takes on their voice, you're like, okay, now I have a character. It's not just me anymore, it's a character.
Right, but I always knew she would become herself. I mean, that was my intention. It wasn't to write me, it was to use me as a jumping off point for the fun of it. And I also, for the fun of it, put a bunch of Easter eggs into Skog Hall. I use like family names as place names and character names, and I reference some stuff from my life, which, you know, is completely irrelevant to most people.
Yeah.
People who know me think it's funny.
Right. So you have a lot of experience as a writer. Was there a certain point where you were like, oh, okay, now she's no longer me, now she's Jess? How does a new writer recognize like when the character has become her own self?
I think you have to go into it knowing that the character is not you. It's sort of like if you were a rag doll, a white cloth rag doll that you buy in a craft store, and then you turn it over into the story world and somebody else puts on the hair and the eyes and the clothing and gives it a voice. And so you need that distance to create perspective and to let the character come to life. And so she might have your diet, your body type, your, you know, she's from Minneapolis, she's athletic, she's a vegetarian. So I used those things that I live every day as my template. But I did that knowing that she can't be me because, like I said, it would just stop up the creative flow. And I needed her to develop her own voice and interactions with characters. I wasn't trying to create a fantasy world for me to go into through her, right?
That's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Which can happen too, right?
Right. This wasn't The Sims. This was a novel.
That's great advice. This is not The Sims.
Yes. Totally different. All right. So, Matt, go write that rock climbing story.
I'm on it. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Thanks a lot. And that's it for this week's Storyworks Roundtable.